I'd like to welcome everybody to the April 11th, 2017 meeting of the City of Columbia Board of Zoning Appeals. I'm Chuck Sally and I chair the board. This time I'd like to introduce the other members of the board. To my far left is Reggie McKnight, and to my immediate left, Calhoun McMeekin. Then to my right is Gene Dinkins, and to my far right, Tyler Gregg. I think that I think April Jones is expected. There she is, and here comes April Jones. I was just going to introduce you in absence, saying that you would be coming in, but there you are. So, welcome. This time, I'd also like to introduce the staff that assists the board. So, at the table in front of us is Brian Cook, the zoning administrator, and Tabitha Prophet, the associate planner. Also, Andrea Wolf is sitting in the pews over there. She's the senior secretary for the Planning and Development Services. The board is charged with hearing applications for special exceptions, variances, and administrative appeals. All testimony is recorded for the record, and anyone wishing to speak will need to be sworn and must come to the podium and speak. No testimony can be taken from the floor. When you come to the podium, state your name and please speak clearly into the microphone because this meeting is being recorded. For those of you who plan to speak, you must be sworn. So if you're here as an applicant or if you are here to speak in any case, please stand at this time and raise your right hand. Do you affirm or attest that the testimony you will give today is the truth and nothing but the truth? This time I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Cook.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Start with the consent agenda. The board uses the consent agenda to approve non-controversial or routine matters by a single motion and vote. A member of the board or the general public wants to discuss an item on the consent agenda at the beginning of the meeting. That item is removed from the consent agenda and considered during the meeting. The board then approves the remaining consent agenda items. If an item is removed from the consent agenda, that item will be heard after old business on the regular agenda. And the old item we have today on the consent agenda is the approval of the March 14th, 2017 minutes. Mr. Chairman, anyone on the board or anyone in the audience like the March 14th, 2017 minutes removed from the consent agenda?
I see none. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Make a motion to approve the minutes as set forth in the documentation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
Takes us to the regular agenda, item number 2, 2017-0030, special exception at 528 Summit Avenue, tax map 092120405, special exception to establish a single-family residence. This parcel contains two structures, both of which have been previously used for commercial uses. The structure that's orientated towards Summit Avenue was built originally as a residential structure. It was converted to a hair salon at some point, and the applicant requests that the single-family home or the hair salon be used again as a single-family residence because of the length of time it's not been used as a single-family residence in the C2 district. That requires a special exception for the board. Staff sees no concerns and it's adequate parking for the residential use. The applicant is here if you have any questions for her.
Would you approach the podium, please, ma'am?
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Charlene Trapp, and this is my right aunt, my oldest son, Louis Trapp, so he's here with me. We're here today wanting to establish the commercial property back to its original intent, and that is a single-family resident. And that's my request for today from the board.
Mrs. Trapp, I'd like to really make a comment that you've done an exceptional job of explaining, giving your explanation for each one of the criteria, all 8 of them, on the special exception. And I really think that I don't even think I need to ask you to read them because I think we can just read them into the record. But I think that, it's, it's clear and it's evident to me that, you've explain yourself clearly and understandable so that the board can make a recommendation by reading your comments, and I appreciate that. Is there anyone else here to speak in favor or against this proposal? Okay. Is there any questions from the board of Mrs. Strapp? Y'all may sit down if you'd like. I'd like to make a motion to approve this request based on the written testimony of the applicant as in this application, subject to any provisions recommended by staff. Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
Next two items on the agenda, number 3 and 4, are both at 325 Veterans Road, tax map 16406-0607. The first is a variance to the parking requirements. That's case 2017-0031 variance. The second is a variance to the buffer transition yard requirements. That's 2017-0032 variance. For purpose of testimony, the applicant will talk about both of them at the same time. However, you will need to take a vote on item number 3 and item number 4 separately. The applicant is here and can answer any questions.
Good morning. My name is David Brandeis. I'm with Genesis Consulting Group representing the applicant. I'm going to go through the 4 points fairly quickly. This particular property is a very unusual shape. It's a very thin triangular piece. It was created when I-77 was constructed, and right behind it is a large drainage ditch that I-77 basically ditched to create that improvement. It's left us with a very narrow piece of property that's somewhat difficult to work with. If you notice, there's a little cutout in the front where the DOT right-of-way changes. So it's a very inconsistent piece of property. We want to use this as a data center, but also a combination with working with a local construction company and a mobile pod user who will use this as a logistics area. With a construction company, we're not talking about a laydown area where we have construction debris and those type of things. It's more of a intermediate office for his superintendents to use when they're out in the field. So we're not talking about stacking of blocks and those type things. It'll have a very limited general public access, even though it's a commercial use. It's not a general public access, which is one of the reasons why we're going and asking for a reduction in the parking. The landscape buffer would require a 20-foot buffer in the rear. This property is only 46 feet deep in the center. So if we took a 20-foot buffer in the rear, we'd only be left with 26 feet of property, which would be barely enough to put a driveway. So if we tried to put that buffer in there, we'd really be restricted on our side. We will have some landscaping in the rear, but it won't be a consistent 20 feet. And then we also have the landscaping that's created by the ditch, which is heavily wooded. We will be able to maintain the street yard, which we think is the more important landscaping buffer in this particular use. Okay, so those are the extraordinary exceptional conditions. The conditions that don't generally apply to other properties. This is the only triangular piece you're going to find in this area that is this narrow. Most of the other properties have much deeper areas. But if you look at some of the other properties, the party rental, for example, they encroach into that drainage easement with their parking. The printing company's building is located only 4 feet from that easement. And you can, obviously the oblique view makes it look like it's even more, but it's encroached all the way in. And then looking at the parking, the party center only has 5 spaces. And then the 2,400 square foot building right adjacent to that, while it has 11, many of those are parked right into the DOT right-of-way. You can see that gray car, which is almost at the back of the sidewalk, it's parked into the right-of-way. So while it's able to comply with the parking requirements, it only does this by encroaching into the DOT right away. The third condition, because the conditions noted the requirement of the zoning ordinance effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the property, this property has been vacant since the construction of I-77. No one's been able to find a commercial use for this particular piece of property. It's mainly because of that narrow depth. If you tried to put a narrow depth in there like that, you wouldn't be able to build a building or anything of any reasonable size. 4, approval of the variance would not substantially detriment to the adjacent properties or to the public good or to the character of the district would not be harmed. Our variance would put us very similar to our adjacent parcels. The building would be similar in size and shape, although it would be slightly larger. The amount of parking would be similar, and the amount of buffering would be actually more when we talk about our street buffering, and very similar to our rear buffering. Next question, is the variance minimally required? We've worked with the owner to get the exact number of parking spaces that he would need. One of the reasons why you have a minimum parking is you don't want people parking on the streets. This particular use is more parking spaces than he needs, plus it provides us some maneuvering space in the rear to access the building. So we've made sure that this fits. One of the requirements that has been asked for by staff is if this building is vacant for more than 12 months, the variance would go away. That precludes him from selling it to someone else and changing the use so that it would need more parking spaces. So we have a sort of a safety net so that someone else wouldn't come in later on and need significant more parking. We also believe that the landscaping would be in fitting with the surrounding community and still provide a buffer. We are going to put a wood fence up so there is a privacy fence. Finally, is the proposal in harmony with the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance? This minimum amount of parking is designed to fit this particular use. You can see the building actually has a little cutout in it just so that we can kind of shoehorn in exactly what we need, no more than. The use is going to be a very low impact use because it's not a general commercial like a food restaurant or public access. The traffic's going to be very minimal and it's all off-peak traffic. They're not going to be accessing this, typically when people are going to school, there's 2 schools in the area, actually 2 schools and a daycare. They'll be very much occupied during the middle of the day when the traffic is the lightest. There won't be noise or fumes produced here. It's strictly a logistics area, a place for them to have an office, have internet access, to store internally some items. So it's a very low impact use. With that, I'll entertain any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Any questions from the board?
How many employees does a business like this have on a?
Well, and that's one of the important things. This particular building right there is not their main employment. This particular construction company is Boyer Construction, and their main office is on 4500 Fort Jackson Boulevard. But this provides them a secondary access for their field guys not having to come into the main office, which is up on the 3rd floor. It also allows them, if they need to take delivery of something, they can take delivery here rather than take delivery at 4500 Fort Jackson, which doesn't have a very good loading area. The other one is the mobile pod. You've probably seen these all over the place. It's located on Bluff Road, but they needed some additional space in some areas away that they could get the pods moved back and forth. So the number of employees really is 0 full-time here, but there'll be guys who will come for an hour, pick up something. If a delivery is coming, they'll meet them at that delivery point.
So it's just a support
Yeah.
building for their.
It's really a
business.
closet
Okay.
put somewhere else. They just ran out of room on the places they are.
Thank you.
Is there anyone here to speak in favor or against this application? Is there a motion from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the variance to the parking requirements for the proposed computer and data processing business service. Subject to staff comments, please.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
Is that for both cases, Mr. Chairman? One was for parking, one was for landscaping?
We've got to do the landscape next, right?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a motion regarding the landscape buffer?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the variance to the buffer transition yard requirements, also subject to staff comments.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman. Next two items, number 5 and 6, are again at the same location at 2244 Sumter Street, also known as 2246 and 2248 Sumter Street. Tax map 0901603 and 01. It's a variance to the buffer transition yard requirements, in this case 2017-0033 variance. Also, special exception to permit an alternative parking service. It's 2017-0034 special exception. As the last case, we'll hear testimony for both of these cases just once, and then you'll have to take individual votes on the buffer transition yard variance and the special exception to permit alternative service parking. The applicant, Mr. Kaysen, is here and can answer any questions.
Morning.
Morning.
This property, we've got two variance requests here, as y'all have seen. Our request, as you guys probably know, we came to you, I think it was just last month, on the property just south of this, adjacent to it, for a very similar request. So the same buffer yard requirement is applicable here because of the amount of work that we're doing in this building, which is in excess of 50% of the value of the building. The buffer yard requirements kick in, and as well as the landscape requirements. So with that, a 15-foot buffer yard is required. You can see in this picture, 15 feet is, I think the width that we have there, that is a driveway on the left side of the building, and it's a concrete driveway. I'm not sure how long it's been there. And then on the, yeah, right there. Then on the left side currently is a chain link fence. And there are two property owners that fence now on the right side of this photo. The backyard of two neighbors. And they have very little shrubbery. There you go. Thank you. That is about 15 feet. I think it's not quite 15 feet as I recall. So as the requirements state, we would have to take out all of that concrete and put in landscaping, and it would be low shrubbery. I don't think we actually even have to plant a tree in that area because we can plant one elsewhere on the parking lot and still meet the requirements. So our feeling on it, we would contend that it doesn't really help the neighbors and give them the buffer that the requirement is intended for. So we've gone to each of the two neighbors there. They're both in favor of the proposed variance request. I think they both sent in a letter to that effect. What we've proposed is taking out the chain link fence that's currently there, replacing it with an 8-foot wood privacy fence, and we've also, for the neighbor who backs up to the parking lot itself, we've also agreed to put in a faster growing cypress tree to block them from future buffer yard issues. So right now, they don't really have much of a buffer at all. They have a chain link fence and a little bit of foliage.
Were you given a copy of the letter from Stacy Chepanek at 2203 Marion Street? Say that only because you mentioned that the neighbors were in favor of it, but this is a letter in opposition of the request.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. The two neighbors who back up to where the buffer yard is, so I have not seen those. Yeah, sorry, I had not seen this before.
Is this neighbor adjoining the property?
They do adjoin the property.
Okay.
And we did not meet with them because this, I guess are they the third one down, Brian? Because this doesn't, what we do here, in our opinion, doesn't impact them, whether we get the variance or not. That may have been a poor assumption on our part, but they back up to a shed that is existing. It's a concrete block shed. You see it in the bottom right corner of the property. The other thing that this does, it would take out the driveway and access to the majority of our small parking area, and it also knocks out about 3 or 4 parking spaces in that area. We've got a relatively small area, you can see, so it knocks out our driveway and the ability, and probably shrinks that from 7 to 3 or 4.
Sorry, I was getting off task. So the, going through the variance criteria, if you don't mind.
Yes, describe our proposal in details. We're seeking relief from buffer yard requirements at the rear of the property. Existing driveway and parking lot would need to be removed to accommodate the buffer yard. We recommend or propose an 8-foot wood fence in lieu of masonry wall so as not to disturb neighboring property, and in lieu of the required landscaping on our side. Are other uses located upon the subject property? No. Sorry, you're working through the 4. So we're trying to preserve the limited parking we have at the rear of the property. The required buffer would remove parking at the rear. That's, of course, if you're facing it from Sumter Street, requiring people to park on the streets and in the neighborhood, potentially. The conditions noted above do not generally apply to other property in the area. Other areas and very few other commercial properties other than along Sumter Street have a residential buffer cutting into the necessary parking. Item 3, the requirements of zoning ordinance effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the use of the property. The buffer would cut into the entire driveway, thus removing access to the rear parking and cutting parking spaces. Approval of variance would not be a substantial detriment to adjacent property or the public good, and the character of the district would not be harmed. This building's been here for a long time, and the concrete driveway as well, and it's not been a very good use.
What was the former use of the property?
There was the prior use was Twisted Sister Boot Camp. They were a tenant, and then before
What was
that,
the original,
what
what was it
like
constructed for? Was it automotive?
the automotive use.
repair?
Yeah, automotive repair before. So we feel that this church and the work they're going to do to the building is much more advantageous. And additionally, it's going to remove parking places if we do this. Is the variance the minimum necessary? It is. That will make possible the reasonable use of the land, small amount of land and parking that we have. And with the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance, will it not be injurious to the neighborhood and otherwise detrimental to the public welfare? It is, and it will be benefit the neighborhood by allowing people to park behind our building as opposed to somewhere other than our parking lots. I think there were 12.
With the,
Excuse me, 14. It's 14 existing that we can get in with the variance request.
with the variance request
Yeah.
for the gravel lot? Okay.
Correct.
So in summary, you're repurposing a building, an existing building with an existing drive without a buffer at all, and proposing a 8-foot solid wooden privacy fence as opposed to the standard buffer for that requirement because you're changing the use of the property.
Correct.
Thank you. Any questions, further questions from the board? Is there anyone here to speak in favor or against this application? Excuse me. Yes, ma'am. Could you please state your name?
Yes, my name is Patty Marinelli, and I'm a resident and homeowner in the Cottontown neighborhood. Have lived there about 35 years and have been an active member of the neighborhood association, including past president and other jobs of that sort.
Were
And
you
I would like
sworn in earlier?
Pardon me? Yes, I was.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm looking at the criteria for the variance here, and I would like to speak to those. The first one states that they're trying to preserve the limited parking at the rear, and that would keep people from parking on the streets. So my understanding is that this is a religious organization. The congregation has over 200 members. If even half of them come on any given Sunday, that's quite a few cars. So I don't see that losing 2 out of 14 spaces is really a big detriment.
Is that the parking variance that you're talking about? Or the
I'm talking
buffer?
about the buffer.
Two things before you today is the buffer variance and a special exception for alternative surface. So I'm going to put pea gravel in the available parking to maximize the available parking on the site.
But we haven't discussed the parking variance yet at all, have we?
It's not a parking variance, so.
I mean, right now, we're on the buffer. I mean, he explained what the reasoning for the buffer, but we haven't even started on the parking variance yet, right?
It's not a parking variance, it's a special exception for alternative surface parking. Because of existing conditions on the site in a religious organization, they're only required to provide as much parking as they can physically fit upon the property. So the landscape buffer variance is request number 1. The special exception for alternative surface, in other words, instead of paving the grass area, if you kind of see on the plan behind you, I don't know if it's on your screen, the kind of little circle area, that's kind of a half grass, half gravel area now that they're proposing to.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is, right now, we're talking about a buffer for the driveway. I'm not talking about, a variance. There's no parking variance being discussed.
Exactly, sir. But the point is that he was making a case that removing these spaces would allow less parking, and that would be a detriment to the neighborhood. So my point is we already have a congregation of 200 people coming to park in the neighborhood, that having 12 spaces instead of 14 spaces will not impact greatly the number of people parking on the street. So that's my counter to the first point that he made. The second point says that other areas do not have a buffer cutting into necessary parking. If we look at that area from his lot on that corner heading towards Elmwood Avenue, that entire side of the street is composed of 3 kinds of properties, let's say. Some are undeveloped and therefore don't have a buffer zone. They've been undeveloped pretty much the whole time I've lived in the neighborhood, 35 years. Others have ongoing businesses. They're grandfathered in. They've never had a time when there wasn't a business running, so they don't have a buffer zone because they were never required to. Back in the day, I guess the zoning didn't require those things, or somehow they got out of it, again, before all of our time. And then the third would be these newly developed properties, including the applicants, and so his property was granted a variance to the buffer zone. So he's the only one I know of, nobody has, in other words, a buffer cutting into necessary parking for those reasons. That we hope going forward, we will reestablish that the zoning allows this buffer zone so that we can recover what is intended by the zoning ordinance. The third one, the buffer would cut into the entire driveway, removing access to the rear parking space. I'm not sure how to do this, but I would like to propose an alternative plan. No, the photograph where you were on was fine. I have a laser printer, but I don't know if you can, I don't think it's going to work that far. Is there some way I can point to it? Okay. Will it work from here? It'll work from up here? Okay, so this is showing an entrance here and then the parking here. Then it shows an entrance here and parking here. So these parking spaces here, instead of being aligned here, why don't we put them against the wall? And that means people could enter here, come right up here, take a turn, and here are your parking spaces. This would result in a net loss of 2 spaces right here. So again, we're back down to the 2 spaces. Okay, and then about not affecting the adjacent property negatively. Thank you. I would just say that the variances for buffers, or rather, I'm sorry, the buffer zones themselves are established for a good reason. Over the course of, again, my work in this neighborhood, what we have seen is it's not just the adjacent property owners who are affected. This is a small neighborhood. We have seen in the past when we have commercial right next to single-family residential, as is the case here, over time, the noise, the light, the activity is a detriment when we don't have the buffer zone. And those turn into single-family rental and eventually deteriorate. And so part of what I have done over 35 years is to help revitalize this neighborhood. We're at a good space now, and I would just ask you to please consider that and help us reestablish buffer zones here and along the rest of the properties. Thank you.
Okay. Is that all? Is there anyone else here to speak in favor or against this proposal?
Thank you very much. Mr. Sally, members of the Board of Zoning Appeals, Mr. Cook, I'm glad to be back. There are a lot of new faces since the last time I was here, so I don't know all of you, but some of you know me quite well. I'm Ellen Cooper. I am the immediate past president of the Cottontown Bellevue Historic Neighborhood. I am speaking on behalf of the whole neighborhood. The board of directors at our meeting last night spent a great deal of time discussing this particular property. We've discussed it before. We've been concerned about the parking, but we knew also that that was not something that we could address because that was under a different set of rules. We have in the past been here to oppose not having a buffer at the back of this property when it was going to be, someone was trying to make a halfway house there, and we were before you at that time asking that you require that buffer there for the sake of our community, so that we are delighted to have businesses, we are delighted to have churches in the neighborhood, but we also want to keep the identity of a historic neighborhood. You have received several letters from neighbors stating that they are opposed to this. One of them, Mr. Sally quoted. There was also another from Robin Spaniel that was along the same lines. You have received an email from our board opposing this, and we would ask that you be cognitive of the fact that we would like to have the buffer there. We think there ought to be a distinction between the business community and the residential community where we raise children, where we live. And as Ms. Marinelli said, you know, we would like to keep these single-family dwellings instead of rental property there, which is very likely something that might occur if we are not able to protect our neighborhood. We appreciate everything you do and glad to be back with you.
Yes, please, sir.
Can I speak a word for? My name is David Gentino, and I'm the pastor of the church that is the future tenant there, Columbia Presbyterian Church. So we're a church that meets here downtown. We rent the TAPS space, and we hope to relocate here in Cottontown. I just wanted to speak briefly for this variance of the buffer zone. We spoke to the issue of parking during the week. That's something that's important to us for the sake of the neighborhood. If we have those 2 additional spaces, we're going to discuss Sunday morning and what our membership does on Sunday morning at a further date. But this is going to allow us during the week, as we have Bible studies, as we have prayer gatherings, to maintain parking in that existing space and not in the neighborhood. We're very concerned about being a good neighbor. We are very much for Cottontown. I live a couple neighborhoods away. We're very excited about the development of North Main. We want to be a church that's in the neighborhood, that's for the neighborhood. So we've had an opportunity to meet with the Cottontown Neighborhood Association. Ellen and I had a beer a couple of months ago to talk about just what this is going to look like and how we can be a church that's for the neighborhood, and we want to continue to do that. So that's very much a concern of ours. When I hear about the kids in the neighborhood, when I hear about single-family dwellings, when I hear about the upswing of Cottontown, its continued growth and establishment, those are things that we as a church are very excited for, because we're not just a church that happens to meet in Cottontown. We want to be in the community, for the community, representing the community. We have several members in the community, and so this is something that's extremely important to us as well.
Thank you so much. Now, just out of curiosity, how do you plan on handling the parking on Sundays?
Yeah, we actually do have a parking space. So that's been developed. We're going to rent a parking space that's on Main Street, and so that's going to be the bulk of our parking on Sunday morning.
On Main Street, behind the War Mouth,
Can you approach, I'm sorry,
Sorry.
Mr. Kaysen?
on Main Street, and I'm sorry, I forget the address right now, it's a former car dealership that is.
Jim Moore Cadillac?
Well, no,
Property-
just
nope.
past that, just north of that. It was a used car dealership.
Oh, okay.
With a little white house, about 65 spaces there. Yeah. The largest parcel on the top left corner of the screen, 2404, you see that?
Yeah.
Already paved and lined for about 65 spaces right there. And then the parking lot to the south of us, the 2238 and 2222 Sumter, are also property that we own and have also told the church that they can, worked out with the church where they can park there.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Just to address a couple things, we felt that it was most important to address specifically the buffer between our two back neighbors, because they were the ones most immediately impacted by that. We felt that that addressing that with them was number one importance. Number two was the neighborhood, which we again feel like the removal of parking spaces affects and impacts the neighborhood the most. It doesn't affect and impact the property owners to our rear as much, but it does impact the neighborhood. So that was part of our focus there. If you could bring the site plan back up, Tabitha. Just to clarify, I think it appears on here that if we cut off the driveway and the buffer, we're just losing 2 parking spaces. The reality is, once you do that, it may mean that we lose all of those parking spaces in the concrete area, because although it seems like a car could fit through that little space in between the existing building, one, if it could, it would mean there was probably only 3, maybe 4 parking spaces we could get back there. But it's quite possible we cannot access it at all from a vehicle.
So I was on my mapping software, and I'm looking at 2203 Marion. I see what you mean. It's on the opposite end of Marion Street from this property. So it's about, I would say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 6 houses removed from the actual buffer area that would be affected as a property owner. So that, I think this letter is more of a general, just not necessarily as an affected property owner as much as it is a general, resident of the area that's against the non-buffer criteria, just to make some clarification for the board.
Understood. Thank you.
Is there any questions from the board? So I'm kind of just thinking about this. It looks like that, the need for the parking is not Sundays so much as it is just during the normal, work week, when you are competing with other commercial businesses in the area for parking. And, you're having Bible studies or meetings or church business in those times, and you need as much parking on site as you can for that purpose. I'm sure also, any of the handicap church members and things like that that would not want to walk down the block to go to the church would be utilizing those spaces, I guess, on Sundays as well. I think that,
Correct, yes. Sure, and, yeah, sure.
what is the rule on that, Brian? If they change the use, does the parking variance stay in place?
Not asking for parking variance.
Yeah, to clarify, this
Does the
doesn't
buffer variance
impact-
stay in place, or is it if they change the use? I thought,
The buffer variance, if they change the use, depends what the new use that would come in. We put in most of our case summaries that if it's vacant or banned or discontinued for a period of 12 consecutive months, that the special exception will complete and expire. So if, say the church moved to a bigger and better location at some point, and that was vacant for 2 years and somebody new came in, they'd have to go back to the starting point.
but the change of use, is there, that's why he's got to get the buffer zone now, right? Because it's a change of use.
Yes.
So if somebody came in with a nightclub, would that be considered a change of use?
Yes.
So they would have to come back before the board if they wanted to get an appeal for the buffer zone at that time.
Correct. Right. So if a church was in there and they moved out for 6 months and another church wanted to go in, fine. If a bar, a nightclub wanted to go in, different story. They'd be back before you, and likely parking wouldn't work anywhere in that scenario. If it was a bakery, it would be a change of use as well. So really, they're kind of locked in for this particular use unless they come back with a church or something very similar to a church.
Any other questions for the board?
Well, sorry, to clarify, that's the requirements would only, and so similar discussion we had last month, it would be mulch. Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the requirement would be for mulch and low shrubs, boxwood or something like that. I'm not good at the landscaping stuff, I'm sorry.
But you wouldn't, then would you be required to have a fence with the buffer? Brian, would a fence be required if they did the buffer?
Would a fence be required if what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
In addition to the buffer?
Yes.
Okay.
But no trees would be required here because we can meet the requirement with like one tree right there in the middle, as you see.
Regarding the proposed wooden fence, Brian, is an 8-foot fence compatible with the city zoning ordinance, or is that the maximum height, or?
Generally, 8-foot fence, if you're going to have, use it as a screen, you get 8-foot fence, put the good side to your neighbor, and that fence reduces your required planting and width 25%, basically. So 8-foot fence is consistent with applications we see in other areas. Alternatively, a 6-foot masonry wall further reduces it 50%.
And this is an 8-foot, just clarification, we're proposing an 8-foot privacy fence, wooden privacy fence.
It's not included on here because it's on we've agreed to do it on the property owner, on their property, but the cypress trees that we've agreed to plant would be just to the top of this parking area as you're looking at it here. If that makes sense.
We need to also discuss the surface area for the parking?
If you want to go ahead and take a vote on this, you can, and hear the parking surface as a separate case. You'll have to vote individually either way. Since we pretty much covered only the buffer now, if you want to go ahead and take a vote on
Okay,
that.
so we can make a motion. I would like to make a motion that we approve this application for the buffer with the stipulation that they put on the 8-foot wooden privacy fence on the property, and that I believe that the applicant has proven in his testimony and his application that the criteria apply to this specific piece of property that to meet this request. And I ask that this be subject to any of the staff comments in the application. We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? One opposed. Motion carries.
Thank you.
May we talk about the surface
The next
area now?
request is a special exception for alternative surface. So as Brian stated, as it actually is shown here in this proposed landscape plan, this is actually how it is today as well. However, what we propose to do is concrete area will remain, and then what is currently gravel with some weeds and grass that's grown up in it will be converted to or improved to pea gravel. So 2 points for precedent on this. The Warmouth restaurant, which we developed 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, is also an alternative surface, gravel lot. I'll admit we've learned some things through that. So our neighbors, actually our architect on that project, Studio 2LR, ended up moving their office to Main Street after our project, and they also had an alternative surface, and they put in a pea gravel. So we have agreed to do the same type surface that they did, there, which is, my understanding, is a kind of a chipped gravel, chipped granite gravel. So our reasons for that were that, one, aesthetics. We just feel like in this area we don't need any more asphalt. There's a good bit of asphalt in this area, and paved surfaces to include the 5 or so acres right across the street. One, and then two, this area and primarily this corner of Sumter and Franklin is prone to flooding, and we feel like adding more paved surface will only add to that, those issues there. So,
Could you go through the criteria for the special exception?
I don't have that one actually.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, while we're getting that, the Studio 2LR that Mr. Casey referenced, they utilized a base core stone of number 57, topped with a tightly packed decorative granite stone, number 789. Just in case you're asking.
Yeah, I was going to say that, Brian. But,
Got it.
the proposed special exception will not have a substantial adverse impact on vehicular traffic or vehicular and pedestrian safety, and adequate provisions are made in the proposed exception for parking and for loading and unloading. Our proposal will impact vehicular traffic positively by providing a gravel parking lot so that cars will not have to park on the streets of the neighborhood, and we make provisions for handicap space. As you can see, a paved handicap space here, as well as 7 paved spaces in the back as well. The proposed special exception will not have a substantial adverse impact on adjoining properties in terms of environmental, noise, lights, glare, vibrations, fumes, odors, obstruction of air, light, litter. The proposal will not adversely impact adjoining properties in terms of any of these environmental factors. In fact, we believe they would be positive environmentally. The proposed special exception will not have a substantial adverse impact on the aesthetic character of the area, to include a review of the orientation and spacing of the buildings. One point to clarify, this is blocked by a 6-foot wall, something like a 6-foot masonry wall, but what portion of it you can see. Understanding aesthetics is a personal taste or opinion, but we believe this would be more aesthetically pleasing than an asphalt parking lot. The proposed special exception will not have a substantial adverse impact on public safety or create nuisance conditions detrimental to public interest or conditions likely to result in increased law enforcement response. Public safety and public interest will not be adversely affected by the parking lot. It will provide a safe place for people to park where they won't have to worry about cars speeding by. And again, we are improving a building and including two ancillary buildings that currently have homeless people regularly in there. So we feel that these,
What are your plans for those buildings? Are they going to be part of the parking lot? One's just a shed, right?
One's a shed, one's a concrete shed, and the plans for that, for it to remain storage. We've already cleaned it out. It was full of a lot of stuff. We filled up a whole roll-off dumpster. And then the other one will remain as it is, the covered.
A covered parking area?
It'll just, potentially parking, potentially, a picnic shelter or something like that for something to be outdoors. And then 5, the establishment of the proposed special exception does not create a concentration or proliferation of the same or similar types of special exception use, which may be detrimental to the development or redevelopment of the area in which this special exception is proposed to be developed. Again, we do not believe that the special exception has been used elsewhere in the area, but we feel like, again, there's plenty of asphalt parking around here, and only 2 now instances of alternative surface. So that's our opinion on that. Proposed special exception is consistent with the character and intent of the underlying district as indicated in the zoning district description, with any applicable zoning overlay district goals and requirements. We don't feel like this strays from the character or intent of the underlying district. In fact, feel like it actually is complementary to it. This is, as far as we can tell from old maps, this has been in place for a long time as a gravel lot. The proposed special exception is appropriate for its location and compatible with permitted uses adjacent to and in the vicinity of the property. Again, it provides a gravel surface for a much-needed parking area so that people can park on site, not in surrounding areas. And the proposed special exception will not adversely affect the public interest. I feel like the special exception will benefit the public by reducing the amount of people parking in the neighborhood, but also potential flooding issues that we've already addressed.
Very good. 6.
Yes. This, I can't tell you it's always been gravel, but yeah, it's gravel right now, yeah.
It's like a kind of grass and gravel
It's
kind
like
of,
a combination,
hadn't been redone. You're proposing to redo it.
Redo it, yeah.
So it's consistent.
You're right, absolutely, yeah. No, it is.
Then 6 and 7?
You want me to read those again?
Yeah, if you don't mind, just go through the last 3, since we've gotten this far.
Yeah, no, I just went through those, but I can go through them again.
Proposed special exception is consistent with the character and intent of the underlying district and is indicated by the zoning district description, which is applicable zoning overlay district's goals and requirements.
Yes, it does not stray, we feel like it doesn't stray from the character or intent of the underlying district, but adds to it. And then 7, it provides a gravel surface for a much needed parking area so that people can park on site and in the surrounding area, as well as people. Our hope would be this would be more attractive for people both in the congregation and in the neighborhood to be able to actually use the space rather than on a asphalt parking lot. And then 8, the proposed special exception, we feel will benefit the public interest by reducing the amount of people parking on the street and the flooding issues that we've addressed. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, and I mean, there's very little obviously we can do about that. My hope is that the current city work, the work that the city's doing will help that, but I can't address that.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions for the board? Is there anyone here to speak in favor or against this application for an alternative surface parking area? I would be happy to entertain a motion. I'll be happy to make one.
Motion to approve case number 2017-0034-SE. I think that the applicant has stated his case and has gone through the criteria. I would make this contingent on the testimony given and the information in the application and in the staff comments in our summary.
Second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed. Motion carries.
Thank you.
That concludes your regular agenda today, Mr. Chairman.
Adjournment. Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Adjourned. We did get out early.